Hi guys. Hey. Good to see you again. Welcome to NSBudapest for this very special event with Orta Therox. So, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I've had 2 days in Budapest so far. It's been beautiful. The weather was like Britain 2 days ago, and today is quite nice. It was nice. We went out to the railway museum, saw some trains. Beautiful. So I want to talk a little bit about an idea that we have where I work, which is open source by default. I want to talk a little bit about the process of how we managed to get to the point of open source by default, the idea behind that, like why we even wanted to do it, and then like some extrapolations on roughly where I want to take that further and how I can use the ideas of open source by default to motivate myself into being a better programmer. So to get started, I think it's still safe that I should introduce myself, maybe. I'm Orta Therox, and I run a mobile team of 5 people in New York, in London, Amsterdam, and Berlin. So we're pretty distributed. We work at a place called Artsy, which you may have heard of from our code side, but you actually have to understand a little bit about what Artsy is in order to understand like how we got to where we were. So Artsy is a business, can be summed up in one line, which is we're planning to make all of the world's art available to anybody with an internet connection. And that's like the pure value point of exactly what we're trying to do. And if you are into art, chances are you might actually love our applications and our websites, and it's a good way to get recommendations for art or to buy interesting art. But the part that's actually relevant to the talk in hand is our value system. So we use a value system in order to make larger decisions. I feel like some of these posters over here show some of the Skyscanner core values. And I'm going to go over some of ours for Artsy. They're pretty simple, but we use it a lot when we're trying to figure out like hard decisions, because not everyone always agrees on product direction, and sometimes we have to discuss with designers whether like something's a good thing or a bad thing, and the values are our fallback for this. So our first one is very simple for a company called Artsy, which is that the things that we want to do should be at the intersection of art meets science. So that is like, we want to be showcasing art as beautifully as possible in a technically proficient way as possible. So that means, you know, trying to adopt new technology when it seems to offer better ways in order to build things faster. In order to, you know, we're looking at VR at the moment as ways of like trying to explore the art world. And that's just an example of like how you can mix art and science together in a way that like corresponds to our core company values. We have people are paramount, which I'm pretty sure every single company has something like this, so you just have to have one in there anyway. But this is like the idea that you know, the people that you work with are important, and the relationships between human beings can be more valuable sometimes than the relationships between companies, and thus you actually do have to try and consider like the end results of your individual decisions and how they affect people. We try to do quality worthy of art. Oops, sorry. Ooh, I'm much louder if I do it here. So I'll do this. I want to have quality worthy of art. No, maybe not. Okay, I want to have quality worthy of art. And that is like the sense of the work that we do should be ideally trying to either hide away completely and let the actual art that we are showing to people fade away as much as possible, and be as functional as we can. Finally, positive energy. This is like something that I take very personally because I work on very large open source projects that mean I get to interact with a very large amount of the community, and like trying to make sure that you are constantly positive and constantly come at every interaction with other people with best intentions can both be difficult, and as a core company value, it's something that we value as a company too. But I care about this a lot. And then finally, rather conveniently for me, we actually have one that is specifically called openness. And this core value is about the problems of the art world. So by default, art is usually done behind back doors in closed rooms. So like a lot of dealing with art usually revolves around like vague pricing or like not, it makes it very hard for new people to get involved in the process because no one understands it until they get into it. And so for us, we work very hard in trying to find ways in which we can make the art world more transparent for people that maybe like yourselves might be actually be interested in buying art, but the actual process of doing it is extremely painful. And so one of the things that we do is we try and simplify that. And so these are our core values. They're relevant though because these are sort of the things that I will use later in order to explain like how I managed to persuade people that some of the ideas that I had were maybe worth pursuing. So, I have some pretty serious open source chops now, but at one point I did not. Around 2013, I started taking the idea that maybe I should start contributing back to the community that I've been working on for a very long time. I got a tattoo when I was 16 that is a reference to the open source community, and it's been something that I've cared about deeply, and that I've understood that the work that I've been doing has been building on the shoulders of people who are effectively giants that just allows me to just build on top of their stuff. And I've spent a lot of time not giving back to these people, and so I wanted to do that to the community that I worked with. So I didn't have, when I started trying to decide what I wanted to do with my time in the open source world, I started to think along the lines of like, what is the biggest project I could contribute to? And I didn't really have the words to describe it then, but when I started looking back on it a few years later, I was trying to find a way in which I could have an impact that would affect a very large amount of people. And the way that I think about it right now is, my work every day on open source tools and open source apps has a multiplier effect. And this meant that I started working on what is effectively known as one of the biggest projects in the iOS ecosystem, which was CocoaPods. Shocker. So, CocoaPods, as you may probably know, is a dependency manager, blah, 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 blah. But the interesting thing about that is that a lot of people know me through my work on CocoaPods, but strictly speaking, I don't actually work on CocoaPods. I probably have maybe 100 to 200 commits in the actual dependency manager parts of CocoaPods. I understand a lot of the underlying code, but there's very few times when I actually write to it. I'm a read-only consumer of the CocoaPods dependency manager. My actual time is spent on the sort of things that most people don't do in open source projects. I built the documentation systems, I built the websites, I built the brand, I built this logo. I've been involved in project managing decisions. A lot of the times somebody has to be the person that makes a hard decision. A lot of the times that person ends up being me. And a lot of that helps because I'm usually not the one that's writing the code at the end of the day. So I can fight for the idea of people who are using CocoaPods rather than well, I've already started writing this, or I thought it would be a good idea if I reuse some of this subsystems. And then my favorite thing is I get to use CocoaPods to do interesting one-off projects. So I've done projects like the CocoaPods test jam, where we try to persuade as many people as possible to spend a day just writing tests for other people's code. It worked out really well. I think we got 60 odd pods that gained more tests in its usage. Oh, and socks. That's my favorite one. That one just happened recently. You can get CocoaPod socks with this design. It's really awesome. So one of the cool things about doing that is that we work on really high-profile things. So CocoaPods has a very, very large app install base. These are actual unique apps. This was, I think I checked this morning. It updates pretty once every we gain a major version roughly every month at this point. So it's constantly increasing the amount of apps that are using the project. We have enough Git clones now that we take down GitHub occasionally, which is yeah, not something to be proud of. But it's an indicator of the size of our community and the impact that our community has within the larger programming community too. So it's something that I think about quite a lot. So this is actually kind of different though to what my day job was. when I was working at Artsy maybe 2-3 years ago, all of when I kind of wake up in the morning, like I would be really happy and proud of like my impact on the open source community and like to some extent some programming communities. But I'd been working at Artsy at this point now for 4.5 years, and the thing that Artsy has is that we have an impact on the art world. And that's great. We have ways of like actually measuring our impact on the art world where, you know, 4 or 5 years ago we were not mentioned on like annual art world reports, and now we're like on every single page. But like as a person, I wanted to be doing more than just impacting the art world on my 9-to-5 job. And that was like a pretty reasonable thing to do, to want when you have like something that you're working your spare time on that would impact a very, very large amount of people, and then you come back and you work on an app with, you know, I guess at that point, hundreds of thousands of users, maybe. While still like having a strong impact within the rest of the art world, but it was a small thing. And I would sit there and think that like I want to start using this to like impact a larger amount of people with my day-to-day work, as well as the side project and like occasional, and not so occasional now, like actual work time that I would be devoting to CocoaMods. So that was where I was like roughly 2.5 years ago, trying to figure out like where do I go from now. So I set myself a goal. At this point there was only 2 engineers at Artsy, and I wanted to try and set a foundation for further team growth. Like I knew that we would be able to hire more, and I knew that I wanted to try and make this team something that would like shine, that would be hard for others to replicate easily. And so I set a simple goal, and that goal was to make the Artsy mobile team entirely transparent. And what this means effectively is, I'm going to use Artsy Eigen here for all our slides, mainly because it's like the biggest app that we have. It's like, I don't know, maybe 100 odd view controllers, tons of different interconnected things. I think it's like 100,000 lines of code. So it's a really interesting one when you're trying to figure out like what projects should I look at. So I wanted to make sure that everybody could see all of our commits. So that meant that like every incremental bit of work that we do is available for anybody else to be able to see. I wanted to be able to publicly talk about our process. So it's very easy to you know, have the discussions about what your team's culture should be on internal wikis, on Trello boards, or being held up in Slack chats, or maybe even just like in actual real world meetings. We tried to like actively work to take the sort of cultural discussions that we were having as a team and make those publicly available for everybody else to like consume and to give back on. We got some great feedback on like trying to figure out what a sprint planning framework should look like for a team of 4 to 5 engineers. We wanted to make sure that all of our code was being code reviewed publicly. Like, I know some of these things sound very simple and very obvious when you're like working in an open source way, but like it's very easy to be able to work on these things in private and then ship them all off to a different fork. So one of the most interesting things about doing code review publicly was that it meant that we had to think about 2 audiences every time we would write a pull request. We had to think about the open source community, and none of these show it, but I think we have like 100 odd watches on these repos. So that meant that every time we were making a pull request, that went out to 100 odd people as well as the Artsy mobile team. So that meant that our pull requests needed to be like understandable for people that had no context of what was changing, and understandable for people that had all the context on what was changing. So it forced us to actually slow down and write up a lot more in these pull requests than it would in any other like context. We even went as far, and I'm still constantly pushing to keep this one going. We moved to moving all our design iterations actually on GitHub in public issues that then were available for everybody else to see. So we so far haven't had enough push to ever do like a release where we could keep all these things secret. So every time we have any design changes or any new designs to our apps, we try and make all that design QA publicly available on our GitHub. This is mainly for consolidation. We do a lot of, we use GitHub issues to keep track of bugs and features, and for large teams we can use, I think it's called ZenHub, which allows you to do like a Kanban style overview for multiple GitHub repos. So you can have multiple like projects all running simultaneously, but you can still talk on a larger scale through this Kanban style thing. So we could do all that design work in there, and that would be public too. And this is really interesting because a lot of people ask, like, what is the design and developer relationship like? And this is one pattern, and this is how we've been doing it, and it's worked out pretty nice. I wanted to make sure that it was very easy for somebody else to actually like use our projects very easily and make it easily consumable. This one, a general pattern is that we would recommend you to clone it, and then we'd have a make command that would set you up as an open source contributor. Like, contributor is not the right word actually, so maybe consumer. There's a thing about expectations later, but I personally consider an issue raised on one of our repos about I couldn't compile this like higher than like a confirmed bug from one of our designers in the actual process of us trying to keep things like what we should do every day. Because like some of the advantages that we get from being open source by default would be completely thrown away if we can't get it very easy for anybody else to instantly make and run a version of our application. Whew. Okay. So, how did I start this process? Well, we started thinking to us, well, I was starting to think to myself, what was the process in which I could start moving from a team that had none of the things that I've just shown you to all of those things that I've just shown you. Like, I wanted an entirely transparent mobile team, but at the time it was me and one other person, and I needed to set foundations that could last to the point where we're at now, that we could work entirely in the open. So I started out really simple. It was to create open source libraries. So I would take our applications that were all closed source at the time, and we would start pulling out abstractions into shared code that would just go on CocoaPods. And then what we'd do from that is, wait a minute, I would start something new as open source. So we would take some of our abstractions, put them up first as open source. Step 2, we would then aim to create a new project that was entirely in the open. And roughly that gave us the ability to say, maybe this didn't work, and it wouldn't be a major loss because it's hard to go back to being closed source after being open source. So you can build tooling, you can build like the culture around building an open source project easily on a new project. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we would go back through our back catalog and open source all those older apps. And that is because it's very complicated to open source a very large app, and so it's much easier to do one from scratch. Okay. So at this point in time, let's say 2 years ago, I think Artsy was probably a 70 people company, I think. And it's like I have a lot of political clout simply from being there from like very early, but that doesn't mean I can just go and hit the public button on our repos straight away. So I needed to start selling to the other stakeholders in the projects that I'm working on that they need to, not that they need to hit that button, but that it's a net gain for not just us as developers, but for the designers, for the product managers, for QA, and I had to find ways to persuade everyone from design all the way up to CEO that this path could work. And the way that I did this was by using our company values. One of the first things that I told everybody was that we were not going to be the first people to do this. There's not that many like big commercial companies that are like open sourcing all their applications, but there's also a lot of like existing applications that are like worked on by a lot of people that are entirely in the open, and that hasn't failed them yet. So that examples are like Telegram, DuckDuckGo, Open Whisper systems do Signal entirely in the open, Automatic make all their WordPress apps all in the open, and I went and consulted all their source code while trying to figure out like some of the processes that we got. And so whilst we were like definitely bleeding edge, we were not like the first people to try these ideas, which made it much easier to be able to pitch that to other people that were not like technically, they were not technical. So we would start off, we built a new app once we had got enough political clout to say, maybe this experiment could work. So we created an open source reactive Cocoa Swift app that was called Eidolon. It was a good success. A lot of people were interested and followed its development. We managed to build a lot of useful tooling in order to allow us to ship applications that were in the open, working on some tooling, but it was also known to be a very small project. It was a definitive project that had a start, a middle, and an end, so we could say, if after the 4 months that it probably takes to build this project, that we have felt that doing it in the open has been detrimental to building an app, that we could call it off then. So that made it really easy to pitch that we should open source our apps later, once we could show a success. From that, I started pulling at people's heartstrings and saying that when I started to learn to program roughly 10 years ago as a Mac developer, the only references I actually used were other people's open source applications, and there's 3 of them that I used most extensively. That was Colloquy, Adium, and eventually Quicksilver. When Quicksilver went open source, I actually got myself a bottle of champagne because it was one of my favorite applications, and it was something I used every single day, and now I could actually go and consult the source code and learn from it. I think I had to learn how to use Subversion to even download and get a copy of it, which was great. But the thing about this process was that these open source applications helped me go from being an informed programmer to end up becoming an expert in the ideas of building applications. And that it could be us as Artsy's mobile team, we could help people make that transition. There's a weird period of being a programmer where you've read a book or two, and you've maybe shipped a trivial app to the App Store, and then you're kind of well, what do I do next? Maybe you have a career where you're constantly building new things, but trying to understand how to build and architect very large apps is extremely different from trying to understand how to build a small app. And on top of that, trying to understand how teams work is something that I just had no knowledge of until I could start looking at some of the other companies. They were big open source projects, so not companies. They were open source projects that were actually doing it publicly, and I could see how it was all working. And for me, that was one of the biggest pushes for us. We want to be able to talk about the value of openness, and people are paramount, and we can help transform people from informed programmers to expert programmers by providing examples of how we're doing it at an expert level, and they can steal the best bits and ignore the rest. So I felt that part of that would mean we could open up our process. Opening up our process meant that we could not just talk about things publicly, but we could receive feedback from the community. We had, by the time that we were starting to open up our process, we had at least 2 or 3 people that had a substantial Twitter following. Thus, when we started tweeting out that we were discussing ideas, we would get good feedback from other people that had been through that phase of the team size, and could say well, when we were this big, this is how we did it, and that worked for us until we hit 10 people, and then we had to move on to doing blah. So opening our process would actually make our lives easier because we could get good feedback from other people. And then finally, for me, it's great for developers. Developers are people too, and we we genuinely like the idea of working in the open. And there's some really good examples about how that works out well for us as individuals, which I think I get to later. But it does make it like a better pitch for hiring, a better pitch for individuals when you get to work in the open. And then finally, this one is like, this is a big problem, and this actually came up when I was talking to the Skyscanner team earlier. It would be easy for us to get help on a communal level because we could make these issues that described a problem very well, and then we could get the entire of the community involved in a single place. This one has like 115 comments around like frameworks, and the majority of those are not from the Artsy mobile team. They just happen to be that we started the issue, and like we started it with a single sentence, and then moved on to like the real data down below. But like by being able to centralize all this information, then we can make it very easy for everybody to access and improve their own tooling problems. And finally, like, I keep saying finally, there's still a lot more slides to come. And finally, for that last slide, and for this slide, it's great for community questions. We would regularly get people asking about how our process worked and what things, why did we make decisions, and how are we going to do something in the future. So by being open about our code, we can also be open about our blog posts, where when we mention in a blog post, we can automatically have people give us feedback and ask questions specifically on the repos. Otherwise you'd have to have like a built-in support system, and I don't think anyone would ever think to open up one of our apps to then say, hey mobile team, what is a hybrid app? Like, it doesn't feel, that's not what people are going to do. We could use it to boost the signal of our individual contributors. So I have a junior on our team who did a little bit of open source when she first started working at Artsy, and then we transitioned her app into open source at this point, and then suddenly she was not only contributing back to her community in a smaller way through Artsy, but it meant that she would have the ability to keep the code that she writes from this point onwards entirely with her for the rest of her life. And that's super valuable as an individual, because suddenly, you know, let's say I come work for Skyscanner, like I don't lose access to all the code that I wrote at Artsy. Like the good abstractions that I spent, you know, months building are still available to me wherever I go, and I don't even have to try and think that this abstraction could work well as an independent abstraction or as a library, but I could still say that like the work that I did in this view controller is totally valid in this other context, and I could just reuse some of this code and then find a better way to do it. So that was good. We could use it to do better blog posts because we could actually show our source code. I wrote an entire series of blog posts that were just based on the architecture within our applications. Because we could do that, because we could show all the code, and we could link to places in which we've made changes to those architectural ideas, it makes the blog posts both more compelling and actually forces us to start using blog posts as documentation internally. So we don't have like a private wiki that says like, here's the reasons why we are using the AR switchboard pattern that I made up, or the AR router pattern that I made up. Instead, we can just say that like, here's a blog post that we wrote that links to all of the ideas that we had and provides the why. And that's useful. We could use it to improve our hiring. People love the idea of being able to work in the open source world, as well as like being able to contribute on a team that is known for their work in the open source. So it was very easy to say to the CEO that, hey, you know how it's really hard to hire engineers? Well, if we are doing this process, then it will be much easier to hire engineers in the end, which has worked. Like, I've hired some people through open source because of this. It's great. Okay, so one of the interesting things about running an open source app that is very different from running an open source library is that your expectations should be very different. This is roughly the summary of all of the general users of Artsy, and this is a summary of iOS developers. Right, when you build a library, there is like an implicit expectation that other people may actually use and may reuse and improve your library, and you could conceptually grow a community around it, right? There's an AF networking community, there's a Reactive Cocoa community, RX Swift, but like there is no artsy eigen community, and I know, but like people ask, do we get pull requests? Do we like get people contributing code back to us? And we don't, and we don't expect that to happen either. And like our expectations are very different from when we're running a library to when we're running an application. Like we try and build out libraries so that we can give it away as quickly as possible to as many people as possible, so that we can continue working on our apps instead of trying to continually maintain libraries. But for our applications, we don't aim to foster a community. We aim to like continually make something that's almost read-only. Like we accept that people will write questions and talk about it, but we don't expect people to fix bugs in our like actual code simply because of this. If we were making like a tool for programmers, like Skyscanner is something like my girlfriend uses on her iPad. Like if that was really annoying to me, then I would like maybe even be able to fix it. But it's very unlikely. She doesn't even have my app installed on her iPhone, so it's unlikely to, I know, it's unlikely to actually like garner people making fixes to our apps. So yeah, it's just not realistic. Okay, so where's my beer? Let's have a quick beer. So we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. I've persuaded you all. I've persuaded your managerial people and your CEOs. It's gonna be good. Okay. I have a simple rule about why I think it's very important that we should consider open sourcing like our work as individuals. The simple thing here is, from my perspective, the vast majority of our applications are CRUD, which, if you've used databases, you know that is the create, read, the update, and then destroy? Yes. Okay. Which means that basically all our apps do is one of 4 actions, generally, with an API. And the interesting thing about that is that most applications, you have a server, you then have an app, this one sends down some data, this one does something pretty, and then it sends it back. And what you really seem to have for the vast majority of applications are that you are generating, beautiful, pretty, explorative pictures of data. And one of the things about that is that what it means is the problems that we face in general are the same as everyone else. So I have the problem of getting some JSON from a remote server. I have the problem of converting that JSON into static models. I have the problem of moving code around my application in a way that doesn't lead to too much state, that makes it easy to maintain. These are the same common problems that we all generally have. Normally what we all do is try and use an abstract library that we all share, but a lot of the times there are like good reasons to not do that. And so my general feeling is that my apps personally are not that special. Like the work I'm doing can be like, one of them is a portfolio application for art galleries. One of them is an Apple TV app that just shows some images. One of them is a kiosk that allows you to swipe a credit card and tap a few buttons. And the other is like a web browser for art world stuff. And like, don't get me wrong though, like my app is valuable and like there's definitely worth the time investment that we put into it. But like the actual core common problems that we have are very similar to a very, very large amount of people's core problems when they're building the same apps. A lot of people are doing something that pulls down some API data, does some nice work with it, and then sends it back up in order to start getting some responses. And so part of the discussion around open sourcing our app is actually for us about discussing like what